In the summer of 1944, the United States Army had a mathematical problem. It was a cold, hard equation written in blood and gasoline. The life expectancy of an American tank crew in the hedgerows of Normandy was calculated not in months or years, but in weeks. The crews called their own tanks Ronson Lighters because, like the cigarette lighter, they lit up the first time they were hit. Against the German Panthers and Tigers, the American Sherman was obsolete before it even rolled off the ship. It was undergunned, under-armored, and powered by a gasoline engine that turned it into a rolling bomb. The doctrine said you needed 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger, and you had to expect to lose 3 of them in the process. It was a suicide pact signed by logistics. But then, there was the anomaly, the statistical error. One single tank commander who looked at that math, spat on the ground, and decided to rewrite the laws of armored warfare. He didn't hide, he didn't wait for air support, and he certainly didn't wait for the 5-to-1 odds. He charged. In 81 days of hell, this one man and his crew destroyed 12 German tanks, 258 armored vehicles and self-propelled guns, and killed over 1,000 enemy soldiers. He led the spearhead that cracked the German line. He moved so fast and hit so hard that the Germans became convinced he wasn't just a tank commander, but a ghost. This is the story of the man who turned a tin can into the deadliest weapon in the European theater. This is the story of War Daddy. The man at the center of this storm was Staff Sergeant Lafayette G. Poole. And to understand how he survived when everyone else was dying, you have to look at who he was before the uniform. Poole wasn't a soldier by trade, he was a fighter. Before the war, in the dust and heat of Texas, he was a Golden Gloves boxing champion. And he fought in the ring exactly the way he would fight in Europe. He didn't dance, he didn't weave. He believed in overwhelming violence. He believed that if you hit the other guy first, and you hit him so hard his ancestors felt it, he wouldn't get back up. When he joined the Army in 1941, this aggression was a problem. The Army is a system of rules, manuals, and procedures. It is designed for discipline, not for brawlers. Poole was constantly in trouble. He hated drilling. He hated saluting. He hated the waiting. He was offered a commission to become an officer multiple times because of his natural leadership, and every single time he turned it down. He told his commanders, "I just want to have one of the best tank crews in the division. I don't want to sit in a command tent. I want to be in the turret." That decision defined his destiny. It placed him in the 3rd Armored Division, known as the Spearhead, but it also placed him inside the M4 Sherman tank. And this is where the story shifts from a biography to a survival horror. To understand what Lafayette Poole achieved, you have to understand the machine he was fighting in. History often remembers the Sherman tank as the hero of the war. It was reliable, it was fast, and America built 50,000 of them. But to the men inside, it was a steel coffin. By 1944, the German technology had leaped a generation ahead. A German Panther tank had frontal armor that was virtually impenetrable to the standard American 75mm gun. You could shoot a Panther in the face from 500 yards, and the shell would just bounce off, leaving a scratch. But the German gun, the high-velocity 75mm or the terrifying 88mm on the Tiger, it could punch through a Sherman tank like a hot needle through butter from 2,000 yards away. The Germans could kill you before you could even see them. And when a Sherman was hit, the result was catastrophic. The ammunition was stored in the sponsons, right next to the crew. The engine ran on high-octane gasoline. A single spark would turn the crew compartment into an incinerator in seconds. This was the reality Lafayette Poole faced. He was a heavyweight boxer, stepping into the ring against a giant. And he was doing it with one hand tied behind his back. But Poole had a crazy idea, a theory that went against every field manual the Army had ever printed. He looked at the Sherman's weaknesses and decided to treat them as strengths. The Sherman was weak, but it was fast. It had a motorized turret that spun faster than the German tanks. Poole realized that if he tried to fight a long-range duel, he would die. The math guaranteed it. So, his strategy was simple and terrifying. Close the distance. He told his superiors, "I'm not going to sneak around. I'm going to drive right down the throat of the German army." It was the boxer's mindset. Get inside the opponent's reach. Smother him. Don't give him room to breathe or time to aim. It was a strategy that required a level of aggression that bordered on suicidal insanity. But a tank commander is only as good as the men inside the metal box with him. A tank is a biological machine. 5 brains have to work as one. If the driver hesitates, you die. If the loader fumbles a shell, you die. If the gunner blinks, you die. Lafayette Poole knew he couldn't do this alone. So, he didn't just pick soldiers. He handpicked a crew of misfits who, on paper, looked like a disaster waiting to happen. But in the fire of combat, they became the most lethal team in the U.S. Army. First, there was the driver, Wilbert Richards. They called him Baby. He was a quiet, unassuming kid from the Midwest. He barely spoke. He looked like he should be bagging groceries, not driving a 30-ton war machine. But Poole saw something in him. Richards had a touch. He could feel the engine. He could make a Sherman tank dance. Poole needed a driver who wouldn't flinch when he ordered him to charge a Tiger tank. He needed a driver who would floor the accelerator when every instinct screamed to hit the brakes. Baby. Richards was that man. Then there was the loader, Del Boggs. They called him Jailbird. He was the opposite of Richards, a roughneck, a brawler. He had a criminal record before the war. The Army had given him a choice between a cell and a uniform. Boggs chose the uniform. He had a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. He was angry at the world. And Poole channeled that anger. The loader's job is physically exhausting. He has to grab a heavy steel shell, wrestle it into the breech, and clear the recoil path, all while the tank is bouncing over craters and filling with smoke. Boggs could load a 75mm gun faster than any man in the division. He turned the tank's main gun into a rapid-fire weapon. In the bow gunner's seat was Bert Close. They called him Schoolboy. He was just a kid, 17 years old. He had lied about his age to enlist. He still had the soft face of a teenager who should have been worrying about prom dates, not Panzerfausts. He was the innocent one of the group, but put a .30 caliber machine gun in his hands, and he became a surgeon. His job was to sweep the infantry, to keep the German soldiers off the tank. He was the eyes and ears of the lower hull. And finally, the gunner. The man who pulled the trigger. Willis Oller. They called him Groundhog. Oller was a nervous man. He was jumpy. He had dark circles under his eyes. In the rear, he looked like a man on the verge of a breakdown. But inside the tank, looking through the telescopic sight, the shaking stopped. He had eyes like a hawk. He could spot the glint of a German helmet in a bush at 800 yards. He could put a shell through a window from half a mile away while the tank was moving. He was the heavy hitter. This was the crew of In the Mood. A boxer, a baby, a jailbird, a schoolboy, and a groundhog. They painted the name on the side of their Sherman in big white letters. It wasn't just a name, it was a statement. They were always in the mood for a fight. They landed in France in June 1944, right after D-Day. The beaches were secured, but the real nightmare was just beginning. The Normandy bocage, the hedgerows. If you haven't seen the hedgerows of Normandy, it's hard to imagine how claustrophobic the fighting was. These weren't garden hedges. They were massive, ancient earthen walls, 6 feet high, topped with thick, tangled bushes and trees that had been growing for centuries. They divided the countryside into thousands of tiny, square fields. It was a checkerboard of death. For a tank, it was a graveyard. A German tank could sit behind a hedge, invisible, wait for an American tank to expose its belly climbing over the dirt wall, and put a shell through the thin floor armor. The 3rd Armored Division was stuck. The entire Allied advance was grinding to a halt. The German defenses were perfect. They had pre-sighted every intersection, every gap in the hedges. The American crews were terrified. They were moving at a crawl, checking every bush, paralyzed by the fear of the invisible 88mm guns. But Lafayette Poole didn't crawl. His first major engagement took place near the village of Villiers-Fossard. The infantry was pinned down. German machine guns were chewing up the GIs in the muddy fields. A panzer unit was reported moving up to reinforce the German line. The standard operating procedure was clear. Call for artillery, wait for air support, or flank wide. Do not engage directly. Poole listened to the reports on the radio. He looked at the miserable, pinned-down infantry, and he snapped. He keyed his mic and told his platoon, "Follow me." He didn't flank. He didn't wait. He ordered Baby Richards to drive straight through the hedgerow. In the Mood burst through the vegetation in a shower of dirt and roots, landing in the field with a bone-jarring crash. The Germans were stunned. They were used to cautious Americans. They were used to tanks that peeked around corners. They had never seen a Sherman tank charging across an open field, firing its main gun on the move. Poole stood in the commander's hatch, exposed from the waist up. This would become his signature. While other commanders buttoned up inside the turret, squinting through narrow periscopes, Poole rode with his head out. He wanted to see everything. He chewed on a cigar, screaming targets down to Olaire. "Gunner! Infantry! 2 o'clock! Hedge line!" "Identified!" Olaire shouted back. "Fire!" The 75mm gun roared. The shell exploded in the German machine gun nest. "Driver! Hard left! Keep moving, baby! Don't stop!" The tank slewed sideways, mud spraying from the tracks. A German anti-tank round whizzed past the turret, missing by inches. The air pressure from the passing shell was enough to knock the breath out of Poole, but he didn't duck. "Loader! Give me another one!" "Up!" Boggs screamed, slamming the breech shut. They were a whirlwind. "Schoolboy!" Close was raking the tree line with the bow machine gun, cutting down German infantry who tried to run. Olaire was picking off targets as fast as Poole could call them. In less than 10 minutes, they had shattered the German strong point. They destroyed 3 armored vehicles and neutralized the infantry threat. When the dust settled, the rest of the platoon rolled up. The infantrymen stood up from the mud, looking at the smoking ruin of the German line, and then at the lone Sherman tank sitting in the middle of the field, engine idling. Poole climbed out of the turret, dusted the ash off his uniform, and checked the paint. In the Mood, didn't have a scratch. It was a small victory in a massive war, but it sent a shockwave through the division. The rumor started to spread immediately. There was a crazy Texan in the 3rd Armored, a guy who fought his tank like it was a fighter plane, a guy who didn't know how to reverse. But the fatal flaw of Lafayette Poole was already visible to anyone who looked closely. He was fearless, yes, but he was also reckless. He had a complete disregard for his own safety. He refused to button up the hatch even under mortar fire because he said he couldn't smell the enemy through the periscope. He drove his men relentlessly. He rarely slept. He spent his nights cleaning the gun, checking the engine, obsessing over the machine. He told his crew, "We're not here to survive the war. We're here to win it. And the only way to win is to kill them faster than they can kill us." It was a philosophy that worked against infantry. It worked against light vehicles. But the test was coming. The real test. The German big cats were waiting. As the breakout from Normandy began, Operation Cobra, the 3rd Armored Division was unleashed. They were no longer fighting for yards in the hedgerows. They were racing across France. And Poole was always in the lead. He insisted on it. He badgered his superior officers until they let "in the mood" take point. Being the point tank is a death sentence. You are the first thing the enemy sees. You are the tripwire. When a German ambush opens up, the point tank is usually the first to burn. But Poole claimed he could spot the ambushes before they happened. And the terrifying thing was, he was right. His vision was uncanny. He claimed he could see the shine of a German optic in the tree line. He could spot the unnatural pattern of camouflage branches. In late July, near St. Lo, the division ran into a blocking force, a mix of German Panzer rifles and self-propelled guns. The column stopped. The lead tanks hesitated. Poole roared past them. "Get out of the way," he yelled over the radio. "In the mood" surged to the front. This time, it wasn't a skirmish. It was a duel. A Panzer IV stepped out from behind a farmhouse 400 yards away. Its muzzle swung toward Poole. In that split second, the difference between life and death was pure reflex. "Baby, brake!" Poole screamed. Richards slammed the brakes. The 30-ton tank skidded to a halt, the tracks locking up. The German shell flew right in front of their nose, missing the front armor by a fraction of a second. The wind of the shot shook the tank. "Target front! Tank!" Oehler didn't need the order. He had the crosshairs on the Panzer. "Fire!" The Sherman rocked back. The armor-piercing round flew true. It struck the Panzer IV between the turret and the hull. A flash of sparks, and then a pillar of black smoke. The German tank brewed up instantly. "Next target!" Poole shouted. He didn't even pause to watch it burn. They pushed forward. Another German vehicle, a half-track, tried to flee. Schoolboy cut it down with the bow gun. A German anti-tank gun tried to traverse. Jailbird had an HE shell ready. Boom! The gun was silenced. In one afternoon, Poole's crew destroyed numbers that would take a normal platoon a month to achieve. But this aggression came with a cost. The tank was taking a beating, not from shells, but from the sheer operational tempo. The engine was overheating. The tracks were wearing thin. The crew was exhausted. They were living on caffeine, cigarettes, and adrenaline. Jailbird Boggs later said, "We were all crazy. You had to be. If you stopped to think about what we were doing, you'd jump out and run back to Texas. War Daddy kept us going. He was like a force of nature. You didn't want to let him down." But the machine itself was fragile. The M4 Sherman was not designed for this kind of abuse, and the Germans were adapting. They realized that this one specific tank, the one with "in the mood" painted on the side, was the problem. They started targeting it specifically. The psychological impact on the enemy was becoming real. Captured German prisoners began asking to see the ace. They wanted to see the automatic tank. They believed the Americans had developed a new weapon, a tank that could fire faster than anything they had ever seen. They didn't realize it wasn't a new tank. It was just Del Boggs, sweating and cursing, throwing shells into the breach with bloody hands, driven by a commander who wouldn't let him stop. By August, The legend of Lafayette Pool had reached the ears of General Maurice Rose, the division commander. Rose was a hard man, a disciplinarian. He usually hated cowboys like Pool, but Rose was also a pragmatist. He looked at the map. Wherever Pool was, the line moved forward. Wherever Pool was, the Germans crumbled. Rose summoned Pool to his command post. Pool stood there, dirty, unshaven, reeking of cordite and sweat, towering over the general. He expected a court-martial for recklessness. Instead, General Rose looked at him and asked, "Sergeant, how many vehicles have you destroyed this week?" Pool shrugged. "I stopped counting, General. A few. The reports say you cleared the entire sector north of the river by yourself." "I had my crew, sir." Rose nodded. "You're doing good work, Pool, but you're taking too many risks. You're going to get yourself killed." Pool looked the general in the eye. "General, I'm already dead. We all are. The only question is how many of them I take with me before I stop breathing." It was a chilling statement, but it was the truth. Pool understood the math. He knew the Sherman was a death trap. He knew that statistically, In the Mood was living on borrowed time. Every engagement was a roll of the dice. Eventually, Snake Eyes would come up, but until then, he was going to keep rolling. As the summer heat intensified, so did the resistance. The German army was retreating towards the Falaise Gap, trying to escape the Allied encirclement. They were desperate. They were cornered rats, and cornered rats fight back with vicious intensity. The division was pushing towards a town called Fromentel. Intelligence reported heavy armor in the area. Tigers. The Tiger tank was the boogeyman of the U.S. Army. It weighed 60 tons. It had a devastating 80mm gun. Its frontal armor was 100mm thick. A Sherman couldn't penetrate it from the front, even at point-blank range. To kill a Tiger, you had to get behind it. But to get behind it, you had to survive, long enough to flank it. Pool didn't care. He led the column toward Fromentel. The road was narrow, lined with poplars. A kill zone. Suddenly, the radio crackled. "Tiger! Tiger! Front!" A massive shape materialized out of the shadows ahead. It blocked the entire road. The turret began to rotate slowly toward In the Mood. This was the moment of truth. The moment where the math said, "You lose." Pool didn't reverse. He didn't pop smoke. He did the one thing the German commander inside the Tiger never expected. "Charge him!" Pool screamed. "Ram him if you have to." "Baby!" Richard slammed the accelerator to the floor. The Sherman engine roared, straining against the weight. The tank lurched forward, gathering speed. The German gunner was tracking a stationary target or a retreating one. He wasn't ready for a 30-ton steel brick rushing toward him at 25 miles per hour. The Tiger's turret traverse was slow. Too slow. In the Mood closed the distance. 800 yards, 600 yards, 400 yards. The Tiger fired. The 80mm shell screamed over the turret, missing by inches. The wind of the passage shattered the glass in Pool's periscopes. "Hold your fire!" Pool ordered Oler. "Wait for the shot! Wait for the shot!" He knew the 75mm shell would bounce off the front. He needed a weak spot. He needed the turret ring or the tracks. 200 yards. The Tiger loomed like a fortress. "Now! Track him!" Oler fired. The shell struck the Tiger's track. The massive link shattered. The Tiger lurched to the right, spinning on its broken tread, exposing its thinner side armor. "Hit him in the flank! Kill him!" Oler fired again. And again. 2 shells slammed into the side of the Tiger. The ammunition inside the German monster ignited. A catastrophic explosion blew the turret of the 60-ton tank clean off the hull. In the Mood roared past the burning wreckage, the heat searing the paint on their side. They had done the impossible. They had won a game of chicken with a Tiger tank. Poole slumped back in the hatch, wiping grease and sweat from his face. His hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. "You okay, Daddy?" Richards asked from the driver's seat. Poole lit a cigar, his hand trembling as he held the match. "Keep driving, baby," he said. "There's more of them ahead." This was the end of the beginning. They had survived Normandy. They had survived the breakout. But they had painted a target on their backs so big that the entire German army could see it. The ace of aces was about to enter Germany itself. And the closer they got to the heart of the Reich, the harder the resistance would become. The math was catching up. The probability curve was bending. And "In the Mood" was about to run out of luck. By late August 1944, the math wasn't just catching up, it was screaming a warning. But Lafayette Poole couldn't hear it. He was moving too fast. The destruction of that Tiger tank wasn't just a victory, it was an accelerant. It convinced Poole that his crazy idea, the charge, the aggression, the refusal to hide, was the only way to survive. The 3rd Armored Division was racing across France, chasing the retreating German army, and "In the Mood" was the tip of the spear. Always the tip. But here is the reality of tank warfare that the newsreels didn't show. A tank is disposable. The men inside are not supposed to be. Yet Poole and his crew were burning through machines faster than the army could paint them. The first "In the Mood" didn't survive the summer. It took a hit, a devastating strike that would have killed a lesser crew. They scrambled out of the burning hulk, coughing smoke, eyes stinging. Most men, after escaping a burning tank, would ask for a break. They would ask for a transfer to the rear. Poole walked to the motor pool and demanded another tank. Immediately. And this time, the Army gave him something different. They gave him the upgrade, the M4A1 76. To the untrained eye, it looked like just another Sherman. But to War Daddy, it was a heavy-weight glove. The gun barrel was longer. It fired a high-velocity 76mm shell that finally gave them a fighting chance against the German armor. It wasn't a Tiger killer from the front, but it could punch through a Panzer IV at combat ranges. Poole looked at the long barrel, patted the cold steel, and told Jailbird Boggs, "Now we can really hurt them." With the new tank came a new level of ferocity. The 81-day rampage entered its darkest, most violent chapter. This wasn't just combat anymore, it was an extermination. The Germans began to realize something was wrong. In the chaos of the retreat, reports started filtering up to the Wehrmacht High Command about an American ghost tank. A single vehicle that appeared on the flanks, destroyed entire columns of supply trucks, shattered rearguard actions, and then vanished before the anti-tank guns could zero in. They didn't know it was Lafayette Poole. They didn't know it was a boxer from Texas. They just knew that in Sector 3, if you saw a Sherman with white lettering on the side, you were already dead. The psychological impact of "In the Mood" was becoming a weapon in itself. Poole's aggression was contagious. The tanks behind him saw him charge, so they charged. The infantry saw the Sherman ignoring incoming fire, so they advanced. He was pulling the entire division forward by the sheer force of his will. But inside the tank, the biological machine was starting to fray. You cannot fight for 81 days without consequences. The human body isn't designed for it. "Baby?" Richards was driving on instinct and caffeine. He was hallucinating from exhaustion. He later admitted that the road would sometimes turn into snakes or rivers in his eyes, but he kept his foot on the gas because War Daddy told him to drive. Schoolboy, close, the innocent kid, had stopped looking like a teenager. His face was coated in a permanent layer of grease and soot, his eyes hard and hollow. He had seen too much. He had cut down too many men with the bow gun. And Poole? Poole was disintegrating. The stress of command, the responsibility of keeping his 4 boys alive while playing Russian roulette with the German army, was eating him alive. He stopped sleeping almost entirely. He developed a nervous tic. He ground his teeth so hard he chipped them. But he refused to leave the turret. His fatal flaw, his need to be exposed, to see the battlefield with his own eyes, was becoming an obsession. He claimed the periscopes were coffins. He said, "If I'm buttoned up, I'm blind. And if I'm blind, we die." So he stood there, a 6-foot-tall silhouette sticking out of the top of the tank, a magnet for every sniper in France. Rain, dust, shrapnel, he took it all. He was daring the Germans to hit him. It was at the Battle of Colombier that this recklessness nearly cost them everything. It was twilight, the worst time to fight. The shadows play tricks on you. In the Mood was flanking a town, pushing through a dense wooded area. Poole was, as always, standing in the hatch. Suddenly, the air split open. A German dual-purpose flak gun, hidden in a barn, opened fire. The shells were tracers. Green streaks of light screaming past the turret. One of them clipped the commander's hatch, sending a shower of sparks into Poole's face. "Reverse! Reverse!" Poole screamed, wiping blood from his forehead. But Baby Richards didn't reverse. He froze. The tank stalled. In that silence, with the engine dead and the German gun traversing for the kill shot, the crew of In the Mood faced their mortality. They were a sitting duck, a stationary target for a high-velocity cannon. Poole didn't panic. He didn't drop into the turret. He grabbed the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the roof, the Ma Deuce. He stood fully exposed, the tracers whizzing past his ears, and he opened fire on the barn. It was a duel between a man with a machine gun and an anti-tank cannon. It was insane. It was physics-defying. But Poole's tracer fire poured into the barn, setting the hay on fire, blinding the German gunners with smoke and suppression. "Start the damn tank, baby!" Poole roared, never letting go of the trigger. The engine coughed, sputtered, and roared back to life. Richards slammed it into gear. In the Mood lurched backward into the cover of the trees, just as a German shell slammed into the spot where they had been 1 second earlier. They sat in the dark woods, the engine idling, the smell of burnt ozone and fear filling the crew compartment. Groundhog. Aller was shaking. Jailbird. Boggs was praying. Poole dropped down into the turret. His face was bleeding from shrapnel cuts. He looked at his terrified crew. He lit a cigar. "We know where they are now," he whispered. "Go back out there. Flank left. Kill them." And they did. They went back out. They flanked the barn. Aller put a 76mm shell right through the doors. The flak gun was silenced. This was the War Daddy effect. He could take men who were paralyzed by terror and force them to act. He replaced their fear of death with a fear of failing him. By mid-September, the numbers were becoming astronomical. The score was no longer kept in single digits. In the Mood had destroyed 258 enemy vehicles. Think about that number. 258. That is not a tank platoon's score. That is a battalion's score. They had captured 250 prisoners. They had survived 3 different tanks being shot out from under them. But the law of averages is a cruel master. You can flip a coin and get heads 10 times in a row. You can get it 20 times. But eventually, tails is coming. The 3rd Armored Division reached the border of Germany. The Siegfried Line. The dragon's teeth. This was different. France had been a war of movement. Germany would be a war of attrition. The terrain changed. The hills got steeper. The roads got narrower. The German resistance stiffened. They were fighting for their homeland now. On the morning of September 19, 1944, a strange mood settled over the crew. They were tired, bone-deep tired. They were near the town of Stolberg. It was a gray, overcast day, the kind of day where the sound of engines carries for miles. Poole was unusually quiet. He told a fellow soldier that morning, "I'm on my last tank." It wasn't a complaint. It was a premonition. He told General Rose, "I've got a bad feeling, General. The bell is tolling." Rose offered to rotate him out. He said, "Poole, you've done enough. Go home, sell war bonds, train new crews. You're a hero." Poole shook his head. "I can't leave my boys. If I leave, they die. I take them in, I take them out." He climbed back into In the Mood for the final time. The mission was to flank Stolberg, to cut off the German retreat. But the Germans were waiting. They had set a trap specifically designed for the aggressive American columns. They had positioned a Panther tank, the deadliest predator in their arsenal, in a perfect ambush position. It was hidden behind a concrete wall, its long 75mm barrel covering the only intersection into the town. It was a kill box, and In the Mood was heading straight for it. As they rolled toward Stolberg, the fatal flaw that had saved them so many times, the speed, the aggression, the leading from the front, was about to become their undoing. In the open fields of France, speed was life. But in the tight urban confinement of a German town, speed was blindness. Poole was standing in the hatch. He was scanning the windows, scanning the rooftops, but he couldn't see around the corner. Baby! Richards was driving fast. He wanted to get across the intersection. Groundhog Oler was traversing the turret left and right, looking for targets. Jailbird Boggs had an armor-piercing shell in the breech, his hand resting on the safety rail. They were a perfect machine, operating at the peak of their efficiency. They were the ace of aces. They were invincible. And then they turned the corner. At 5 p.m., the world ended. Poole saw it first. The muzzle of the Panther. It looked like a black hole staring right at him. It was less than 100 yards away, point blank. There was no time for tactics, no time for boxing moves, no time to be clever. "Back up!" Poole screamed. The sound tore his throat. "Baby, back up!" Richards stomped on the brakes. The tracks locked. The Sherman skidded on the cobblestones, sparks flying. But the German gunner had been waiting for this moment. He had the intersection dialed in. He didn't have to aim. He just had to pull the trigger. The Panther fired. The sound was louder than anything they had ever heard. It wasn't a bang. It was a crack, like the sky breaking. The high-velocity shell didn't hit the tank directly. It slammed into the ground right next to the tracks. The explosion lifted the 30-ton Sherman into the air like a child's toy. In the Mood was thrown sideways. It crashed into a ditch, landing on its side. The engine screamed as the tracks spun uselessly in the air. Inside, it was a blender. The crew was thrown against the steel walls. Jailbird was knocked unconscious. Schoolboy was bleeding from the nose. Poole was thrown halfway out of the commander's hatch. He was dazed, his ears ringing, smoke filling his lungs. He tried to scramble out. He tried to get to his crew. But the German tank wasn't done. The Panther commander saw the Sherman was disabled, but not dead. He ordered a second shot. The second shell didn't miss. It hit the turret. The impact was catastrophic. And in that split second, the legend of War Daddy, the man who destroyed 258 vehicles, the man who couldn't be killed, faced the one variable he couldn't outmaneuver: physics. The shell fragment sliced through the air with the speed of sound. It found the only exposed part of the commander. Lafayette Poole looked down. The dust was settling. The ringing in his ears was deafening. He tried to stand up to check on his boys, but he couldn't. He looked at his leg, and he realized, with a cold, terrifying clarity, that the war was over. The boxer was down, and the count had started. The shell fragment hadn't just broken a bone. It had severed the limb. Lafayette Poole, the man who had stood tall in the turret for 81 days, looked down at the catastrophic ruin of his leg. The blood was bright arterial red, pulsing into the dirt of the German ditch. For the first time in the war, War Daddy wasn't barking orders. He was silent. He was in shock. But if the German gunner thought he had killed the tank, he didn't understand the crew. He didn't understand the bond that had been forged in that steel box. Jailbird Boggs, the loader with the criminal record, didn't run. He scrambled out of the overturned Sherman, ignoring the sniper fire that was starting to crack around them. He dragged Poole out of the hatch. Schoolboy, Close, the kid, grabbed the medical kit. They weren't soldiers following a manual anymore. They were sons saving their father. They dragged him into a foxhole. The German Panther was still prowling the intersection, looking to finish the job, but the crew of In the Mood stood their ground around their fallen commander. They applied a tourniquet. They stabbed him with morphine. And as the color drained from Poole's face, he looked at his crew, his boys, and whispered his final command of the war. He didn't ask for his mother. He didn't ask for a priest. He grabbed baby Richards by the collar and rasped, "Somebody take care of my tank." Even as he was dying, he was worried about the machine. Reinforcements arrived minutes later. The medics loaded Poole onto a jeep. As they drove him away, he twisted his neck to look back. He watched In the Mood, lying on its side, smoke curling from the turret, abandoned in a ditch in Stolberg. The 81-day rampage was over. The ace was out of the deck. The doctors at the field hospital took one look at the leg and made the only decision they could. They amputated it high above the knee. When Poole woke up from the anesthesia, the war in Europe was still raging. But his war was gone. He was shipped back to the United States, a 25-year-old man with one leg, a chest full of medals, and a future that looked completely empty. This is where most history books stop. They tell you the hero came home, got a prosthetic, and lived happily ever after. But that is a lie. That is the sanitized version. The reality, the missing page of Lafayette Poole's life, was a brutal, silent war that was harder than anything he faced in Normandy. Poole was a physical man. His identity was built on his body. He was a Golden Gloves champion. He was a warrior. Now he was disabled. The Army discharged him in June 1946. They gave him a pension, a handshake, and told him, "Thank you for your service, but we don't need one-legged tank commanders." Poole went home to Texas. But the silence of peace was deafening. He tried to live a normal life. He opened a gas station. He tried to be a civilian. But the demons of the war followed him. He missed the noise. He missed the purpose. And most of all, he missed the crew. He felt like he had abandoned them in that ditch in Stolberg. The math said his military career was over. The regulations were clear. Amputees cannot serve in combat roles. But Lafayette Poole had spent his entire life ignoring the math. He had ignored the 5-to-1 odds against the Panther. He had ignored the survival statistics of the Sherman. And now he decided to ignore the Army's medical board. He began a campaign to get back in. He wrote letters. He badgered generals. He used his fame as the ace of aces. He argued that his brain wasn't in his leg. He argued that a tank commander doesn't need to run. He needs to think, he needs to lead, he needs to fight. In 1948, the Army finally caved. In a rare exception, they allowed Lafayette Poole to re-enlist. He became one of the only amputees to return to active duty after World War II. But they didn't send him to a desk job. They sent him back to the closest thing to combat they could find. They sent him to the armored school at Fort Knox. They made him an instructor. Imagine being a young recruit in 1950. You are learning how to drive a tank, and your instructor is a giant Texan with a profound limp, a chest full of silver stars, and a reputation that scares the hell out of the officers. Poole taught the next generation of tankers the lessons he learned in blood. He taught them that the manual is a guide, not a Bible. He taught them that speed is armor. He taught them that aggression saves lives. He would tap his prosthetic leg with a cane and say, "This is what happens when you hesitate. Don't hesitate." He stayed in the Army until 1960. He eventually retired as a chief warrant officer. He watched tank technology change. He saw the Sherman replaced by the Pershing, then the Patton. He saw the guns get bigger, the armor get thicker. But he always maintained that the machine doesn't matter. It's the crew. It's the 5 men inside who decide who lives and who dies. So, how did he do it? When we look back at the 81 days, the 258 vehicles, the 12 tanks, the 1,000 kills, it seems impossible. It defies the physics of the Sherman tank. Historians and military analysts have spent decades trying to reverse engineer his success. And when you strip away the legend, you find 4 critical factors. The 4 secrets that allowed a tin can to destroy an army. Factor number 1. The biological machine. Most tank crews were a collection of individuals doing a job. Poole's crew was a hive mind. They stayed together. They refused promotions that would split them up. They knew each other's rhythms. Baby? Richards didn't need to be told when to reverse. He could feel the shift in the battle. Jailbird Boggs didn't need to be told when to switch ammo. He anticipated the target. This split-second synchronization gave them an advantage that no technical specification could measure. They reacted faster than the Germans could think. Factor number 2. The fatal flaw as a tactic. Poole's recklessness, his refusal to use cover, his insistence on charging, actually broke the German OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. The German commanders were trained to fight a cautious enemy. When they saw a Sherman charging across an open field at 30 miles per hour, firing wildly, it confused them. It didn't fit their tactical model. They hesitated. They wondered if it was a trap. And in that moment of hesitation, Poole closed the distance and killed them. He used his own insanity as a psychological weapon. Factor number 3. The eyes of the groundhog. We cannot overstate the importance of Willis Oehler, the gunner. In tank warfare, he who shoots first wins. And to shoot first, you have to see first. Oehler had a supernatural ability to spot targets, but more importantly, Poole trusted him. If Oehler said tank left, Poole didn't ask where. He ordered traverse left, fire. That trust eliminated the delay between spotting and killing. Factor number 4. The acceptance of death. This is the darkest factor. Most soldiers are trying to survive. They act defensively to protect their lives. Lafayette Poole had accepted he was going to die. He told General Rose, "I'm already dead. When you take the fear of death out of the equation, you are liberated. You can take risks that no sane person would take. You can push the tank to its mechanical breaking point because you don't expect to drive it home." This fatalism made him the most dangerous man on the battlefield. Lafayette Poole died in his sleep on May 30th, 1991. He was 71 years old. He passed away in Killeen, Texas, not far from the base where he taught so many young tankers. At his funeral, they didn't just talk about the medals. They talked about the man who refused to be beaten, the boxer who took the hardest punch the war could throw, losing his leg, losing his tank, losing his war, and got back up to answer the bell for the next round. Today, if you go to the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor at Fort Knox, you won't find the original In the Mood. It was left in that ditch in Germany. But you will find the legacy. You will find the training manuals that were rewritten because of what he proved was possible. The Sherman tank was a flawed machine. It was too tall, too thin, and too flammable. But for 81 days in the summer of 1944, Lafayette Poole and his crew proved that it wasn't the steel that mattered. It was the spirit inside the steel. They proved that a Ronson Lighter could burn down the Reich if you had the courage to strike the match. The math said they should have died in week 1. The math said a Sherman can't kill a tiger. The math said an amputee can't be a tank commander. Lafayette Poole proved that math is just a suggestion. The story of War Daddy isn't just about destroying tanks. It's about the refusal to accept the odds. It's about looking at a suicide mission and deciding that if you're going to go out, you're going to go out swinging. And that brings us to the final question. The question that defined his life, and perhaps defines yours. When the odds are stacked against you, when the math says you can't win, do you retreat? Do you hide behind the hedgerow? Or do you tell the driver to floor it and charge straight into the fire? CTA segment. If this story of Lafayette Poole and the In the Mood crew ignited something in you, do me a favor. Smash that like button. It helps us defeat the YouTube algorithm, which is a battle almost as tough as the Siegfried line. And I want to hear from you. Check the comments section right now. I want you to tell me, where are you watching from? Are you watching from the United States, the UK, Germany, or somewhere else entirely? We are building a global community of history lovers here, and I read every single comment. Drop your flag, tell me your city, and let me know you're part of the battalion. Also, if you had to choose a crew position in the Mood, which one would you take? The driver, the gunner, or the commander? Let me know below. Subscribe if you haven't already. We are digging up the missing pages of history every single week. The stories that the textbooks forgot. But we remember. Dismissed.